Hey there, folks. Welcome to the program. Every now and again, I'd like to see if we can get on the program Mel K. And the good news is, every now and again, we get Mel K. And the even better news is, today we have Mel K as my guest. Welcome back, Mel K. Just a joy to have you.
Oh, well, I'm so happy to be here. I'm such a big fan of you and your message and your work. So being here is an honor. Thank you for having me.
Well, listen, you're always just fun to talk to because you really bring it. You're a true journalist that's willing to dig and then to talk about what you find. So, okay, where do we start? Where do you where would you want to start? And if you don't have any ideas, I'll ask you some questions.
Well, I think we should start at, I wrote a book, Americans Anonymous, where I put the premise forward. It's a recovery program for American citizens that are sitting it out that need to get involved. And one part of it is called Sick is Our Secrets, that America has been misled about a lot of our history, particularly post-World War II. So I think that what we have to realize is that what Donald Trump is doing so far, in my opinion, is, as JFK called it, infiltration instead of invasion was happening to our country, and that we had a deep state, which has been denied for decades, that was working against us from within. I think right now there's no way to possibly say that that's not true, but I think the origins of it have been hidden from the American people because, of course, the victors write the history. And what I'm hoping is that the American people start to ask questions about what they have been taught, particularly about the years between 1944 and 1954, when globalism became kind of normalized as the priority of the United States, and why that happened. And when I look into all of this and I see what Trump's doing with tariffs, what Trump is doing with the negotiations he's involved in around the world, I think we have to realize that America was first infiltrated. I think the biggest betrayal of this country was the Federal Reserve in Wilson's term in 1913. But then after World War II, we have to realize that we had something going on, I believe, during World War II that was planning for a post World War II world that was no longer based on nation states. And, when George H.W. Bush walked on the floor of the United Nations when he got in and announced that we would have a new world order, basically run by the United Nations, I think what he forgot to put in there was a new world financial order that would be protected by any means necessary, regardless of nation states, particularly the United States. And once we start to look at what he's doing with tariffs, which is really, I think, reversing the damage of the Marshall Plan, which actually we paid for. But bigger than that, I think we have to look at our debt, our $36 trillion in debt, and start to come to terms with the fact that the United States was lied to, looted, and deceived in paying for not just the endless wars and the military-industrial complex and their Wall Street partners, but frankly, the entire globalism, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, all of the international organizations. Frankly, I believe the American taxpayers funded all of it. And a lot of our debt is because of the machinations with Bretton Woods, with what was going on in Switzerland with Alan Dulles and the Bank of
What
International Settlements. Yeah.
what now listen, what I love, Mel, is that you I don't know who listens to this program, a lot of really wonderful people, but I know in some worlds, listening to everything you just said, they just say, oh, this person's crazy. And even a number of years ago, if I had heard you say what you just said, I would say this person's nuts. The good news and the bad news is you're not. You are saying what ought to have been said for decades. We have been snookered,
Yep.
fooled, gaslit. And the joy of being alive now in America is we are waking, are realizing, wait a minute, they lied. Wait a minute, we've drifted away. The way I would frame what you've been saying, or most of what you've been saying, is that we've drifted away from the founders' vision. We, the
Yes.
people, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, these founding documents of who we are as a people, what it means to be free, that, as has been said many, many times, it doesn't carry on by itself. It doesn't take care of itself. We, the people, have to lean into it and live it and sacrifice for it continually. Benjamin Franklin famously said, it's a republic, madam, if you can keep it. And that's the title of my book, If You Can Keep It. In other words, if we, the people, don't understand how things are supposed to work, when things go wrong or when they drift away, we just let it go and it gets worse and worse and worse. So we found ourselves in this existential crisis over the last few years where we thought, oh, if we do not wake up now and do something now and get radical now, it is over. We're sliding to the abyss. And so, I mean, literally 5 years ago, when I heard the term deep state, I remember thinking, what? I mean, 5 years ago, not 15 years ago, 5 years ago, when the election was stolen and all these weird things were happening and people talk about I thought, well, that sounds like and now, by the grace of God, many of us know a permanent bureaucratic class, an unelected class, and people behind the scenes cynically playing the game and saying, you know what, we're in control now, but we're not going to tell you because we don't want you to wake up. So we're just gonna keep going and keep going. So the fact that, by the grace of God, Donald Trump is elected twice, 3 times, in fact, and people are waking up and saying we need to drain the swamp. We need to whatever. I mean, the first thing, of course, is identifying the bad actors and going back. And so what you've just done, and I want to get into it with you, you're looking at where did this start, right? So I remember when I realized, this started, JFK was murdered by forces in our government. Now, that alone, I think most people would say that's really that's a little too much. But at some point, you have to be honest, there's real evil in the world, folks. It didn't go away. It didn't go away in 1776. There's real evil in the world. There are evil forces that they're willing to kill for power. And so you go backwards, and now you go way before that. So I want to get into this with you because you know what I don't, about where did this come from? Where do you suppose it came from? Does it start with Wilson? Where does it go? President Wilson? Where do you see the roots of this ultimately?
Well, first, I see President Wilson as a dual agent of both the Crown and America, frankly. And if you look at who was inspiring him, it was mainly people from the Crown. First of all, we also have to understand, and this is my firm belief, I'm writing on it right now, which is that I do not believe that the Crown ever accepted the American Revolution as being.
Now, wait. This is heavy. When people start throwing on terms like the Crown, I want to say, what do you mean, Mel K? You mean the British Crown?
I mean, more
talk about this. This is heavy. This is heavy.
I mean the British Crown, but I mean basically the City of London. Okay, so you have to understand the City of London is not London. The City of London is the Crown or the monarch's bank. Okay, and that is the bank that has controlled the world from the beginning, basically. And even in America. But once I believe that the idea was get our troops out of the U.S., not out of the South. Don't forget that the South was very much still loyal to the Crown all the way up to the Civil War. But what we do need to understand is that they then, I believe, made a long-term plan to infiltrate us through the banking system. And then by building the railroads, branching out of the banking system, then making these land leases where they owned the land around the railroads. This was all, I believe, a City of London operation. And allowed in by obviously Wilson. And then, of course, from that came the IRS, which was also to feed money into the Federal Reserve, which was not the Federal Reserve of America. It was actually controlled by the international banking cartel, as I call them now. But the City of London was making the decisions at that point on what to do about this new radical United States of America. And frankly, it never stopped to this day, the infiltration through the banking system to control the United States. And I believe that's what Donald Trump is trying to dismantle right now.
Wow, that's a lot. Okay, so let's go back for a moment. I've heard often people talk about the City of London. So what do you mean by that? Say that again, because that's the piece that I've never understood.
Well, the City of London, similar to the District of Columbia, is a separate part of London where and it was ruled over by the Rothschild banking family for a long time because they controlled the money basically of the monarch. And the city of London is also who was deciding what gold was worth. What, all the stuff that we talk about now in modern terms, they controlled on the global stage, particularly not just gold, but also all kinds of things like shipping and everything else was being decided out of this city of London that still stands to this day. And I believe is between them and the hubs in Switzerland, which I'll get into when we get
okay. When we come back,
today.
we're gonna just keep going. This is important stuff, folks. We'll be right back with Mel K. Welcome back. I'm talking to Mel K. You can find her at the melkshow.com. Okay, so you're talking about some heavy stuff. A lot of folks in my audience, myself included, are not really up on what you're talking about. Now, are you ethnically Jewish?
Yes.
Okay, so the reason I asked that question is because I have heard people say the Jews control the banking system, the Rothschilds, and the so it becomes this kind of like anti-Jewish conspiracy theory. But with all conspiracy theories, there may be truth in it, and you have to kind of pull out, whatever. So talk about that, because I know that, yeah.
Well, what I'll say first about that is I believe that is used as a tool. I've been called anti-Semitic nonstop by the ADL for the last 5 years because I often talk about what I call the Fourth Reich, and people don't like it, but it's financial, and I understand it very well to explain it to anyone, which I will today. In the meantime, I grew up an Italian Jew with, all of we never really thought, at least in my upbringing, I never really thought about that my religious beliefs, which are my own, were anyone else's business. And this whole idea that, first of all, I believe that a lot of the infiltration in America that Yuri Bezmenov warned us about in his love letter to America. Of course, he's the FSB agent that defected to America to warn America about the infiltration of communism, into our country. And of course, he talked about, a lot of this stuff, which is using language to kind of manipulate the masses into accepting this kind of socialist, Marxist ideal in America. And frankly, what has happened is that instead of judging people by their actions, we have gotten to a place where it's very easy to dismiss people as Jews or Christians or Catholics or whatever, when it's like, no, when I tell you the truth about George Soros and his decades of what he's done to this world, then I get called anti-Semitic. No, I'm talking about what he's done. So as long as we're going to go down a path of being very superficial and vapid in what we're saying, like the Jews control X, well, then you don't know history, because what really I think the biggest thing that the American people have to understand right now is that we were being basically infiltrated and deceived by people in our government that were working during World War II to financialize a global control system that was being created by Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles and the guy McKittrick, who was running the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland. While there's people dying and fighting wars all over Europe, they're planning for a future financial world order. And a lot of these people were, in fact, not Jewish. But there were, I mean, obviously there were the Warburgs.
And some Alan Dulles, definitely not Jewish. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, definitely not Jewish. Although there are people who would argue that, of course, Roosevelt was Jewish. All the evil people have to be Jewish. As a Christian, I worship Jesus. He was a Jew. I'm pretty sure Mary was a Jew. I think she was half Italian, I believe. I'm not sure. But
like me.
Right, yeah. I was going to say, in other words, a true New Yorker, half Jewish, half Italian. But in all seriousness, it is important to say, look, George Soros is an evil guy. He happens to be Jewish, yes. But what you're talking about is these are the facts. And these are people that, I mean, really what we're talking about is they're globalists, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And they used to call themselves internationalists, was what they used to call themselves.
Right.
Now they're globalists.
And so a globalist, from my point of view, A globalist is ideologically at war with the idea of America, the founders' vision of America, of a free people who will govern ourselves,
Yes.
where we bow to no king, we bow to God, and we govern ourselves and we're free. That idea goes away if you're not vigilant about it. And of course, through the decades and even the centuries now, you have had people that said, we don't like that idea. We would prefer for the people not to control themselves or to rule themselves, but we like to rule over them. But we don't want to let them know that we're doing that because that would be too obvious. So we're not going to declare ourselves, Soviet communists or whatever. We'll just kind of pretend that everything is still the same, but it's not. And so you're talking about in World War II, a lot of these folks saw an opportunity.
Yes, 1,000%. And what's good news about this now that everyone in your audience can look into, and it's not gotten much publicity, is that Chuck Grassley is working with Milei of Argentina right now on a huge investigation that is supposed to be presented in mid-2026. This is going into the entire situation at Credit Suisse and the Bank of International Settlements, as well as the Nazi rat lines out of Germany at the end of World War II that basically laundered trillions, right now it would be trillions, but at the time, billions of dollars from the 60 million people that were pillaged, killed, put in camps by the Nazis and the all of their accomplices during the World War II. There were billions upon billions of dollars made, and including American companies that were working in Germany and around the world were complicit. A lot of these people were called out, particularly international companies out of Germany in Nuremberg. The bottom line of all of that, this investigation now, is that, yes, we know about Operation Paperclip. We know about McCloy, and we know about the scientists and Alan Dulles bringing scientists and giving them new names and putting them in the Jet Propulsion Lab and NASA and all of that. What a lot of people don't realize, and is starting to come out, is around 12,000 high-level Nazis came through the rat lines into the United States.
Hang on, we're going to go to a break. We'll be right back with Mel K. Mel, you're dumping a lot of stuff on us that a lot of people in my audience, myself included, it's new to us. But I think we're tracking enough because we see that Donald Trump, for some reason, is a force against all these things. I want to go there for a second. Why do you suppose Donald Trump is onto this and is warring against this? What is it about Donald Trump? Because every other president, I mean, the Bushes, certainly the Clintons, Obamas, they're pretty much on board with this. They didn't care to take the trouble to sacrifice anything to fight against this. They thought, we'll just drift along with it. What is it about Trump, you suppose, that says, I want to go to war with this deep state, with all of this stuff, which has prevented America from being a truly sovereign nation where we continue to govern ourselves? What is it about Trump?
Right. And you have to remember the whole issue is nation states. Like, you're talking about America, but the truth is it was our money that paid for the EU, which is a disaster, and the euro. It was all coming out of the Marshall Fund. We were, again, they used, as they always do, the globalist, our empathy and compassion for the destruction that took place during World War II to reconstruct. Well, that reconstruct was also the beginning of the financial looting of America to the tune of trillions of dollars over years in the guise of, support, USAID, which is not aid, it is international development. But in the meantime, Donald Trump, I fully believe, not only for whatever they say, is not only a student of history, but frankly, he knows the international, how this played out, what really happened in World War II and since to the economy of the United States of America, which was an intentional controlled demolition of the United States by the international, I call them the international banking cartel. I'll explain that in a minute. And so I believe that not only is he a student of history, but he's very clear on the idea that all American citizens, there's nothing to say, all American taxpayers have paid for the incredible wealth that has been generated by the endless wars and the war on terror and the globalist projects. And it all leads back to a group of people of which Donald Trump was never a part of the billionaire class, the people that go to the Council of Foreign Relations, to Bilderberg, to the Trilateral Commission, that go to Davos. The one thing all these people have in common is a belief that the United States and Canada are not really separate from Europe. So if you look at all the things that are playing out now with migration, with debt, with war, with Ukraine particularly, you see that obviously the West, being Europe, the America, and Canada, you can put in Australia if you want, are being targeted. We're not seeing them demand that China or Saudi Arabia or India take in the world's people and mass migration, but they're demanding that all the traditionally white Christian countries do. It's the same thing with COVID. If you're going to look at COVID and see how it was played out worldwide on an international level in lockstep, and still want to live in the belief that there is no international group that is coordinating the controlled demolition of nation states that are a threat to them, then you're intentionally not wanting to see it. And I think that the most important thing for that, and your audience can also look this up, is to understand that I believe World War III, which we are on the cusp of now, was planned a long time ago, possibly near the end of World War II. And there is evidence in the CIA declassification of a document that your audience can look up. It's called the Red House document. It's also really covered in the book, The Tower of Babel by Labor, or any of Anthony Sutton's books, or I'm reading right now, The Devil's Chessboard about the Dulles brothers. There is plenty of evidence that all of this money that was being pumped out of the 60 million people that were pillaged and looted and killed during World War II by the enemy was being pumped somewhere. And what I do want everyone to understand and look up is that in 1945, when they were putting together this in Switzerland, now remember, we were told that Switzerland was neutral. The truth is that Switzerland never stopped international banking commerce. And if you look at it that way, and know that Alan Dulles, who went from OSS to start the CIA, and also his brother, John Foster Dulles, was the lawyer for Sullivan and Cromwell. They spent most of their time during World War II. Dulles was based in Switzerland. Dealing with the international bankers and the creation or recreation of the Bank of International Settlements. Now, what people don't know is that in 1945, there was an act passed in America, really pushed by the Rockefellers and Dulles and a lot of other people, called the International Organization Immunity Act. This act gave the Bank of International Settlements and its 63 attached banks, which are the private Western central banks, including our Fed, immunity from investigation, from search and seizure. In fact, the Bank of International Settlements, the Swiss government can't even go in there. There are whole families. Everyone there are exempt from taxes. They are exempt from going through custom. They are exempt from any audits. So that happened. At the same time, the United Nations and all of its tentacles fell under this same act that is still in place to this day. And this was part of the apparatus to create what you said earlier. I call it the parent company, but basically a government above the government that is basically a financial control mechanism using NGOs. I call it the Rockefeller model. It's easy to see how they do it. Of course, Soros, the Clintons, they all followed that model. Then you got the international organizations connected to the United Nations. And then you have the international banks, all of which were conceived and built out in Switzerland around 1944, 1954, all those years. Now, what people need to understand is that the whole point of wars, in my opinion, Smedley Butler said long ago in World War I, all wars are bankers' wars. Well, what does that mean? That means that most wars are the reconstruction post-war is the cash cow for the military industrial complex and the banks that support them, which in America, unfortunately, includes Wall Street, because for whatever reason, we have allowed our military contractors that get billions of taxpayer dollars to also be traded on Wall Street. That is not by accident. So if you start to look at it this way, there is a document called the Red House Papers on the CIA D-class website anyone can look at. And basically in 44, before Germany surrendered, they had Nazis, including Hitler, and the internationalists, which are I call the global public-private partnership, and the bankers, international bankers, met to discuss the Fourth Reich.
Okay, hang on. When we come back, plenty more, folks. Don't go away. Welcome back, talking to Mel K. All right, you're giving us such an information dump because most people in my audience, and I keep saying myself as well, a lot of this is new to us. So I want to just go back so that we're tracking with you. Trump seems to be onto this. He doesn't talk the way you do. He doesn't reference this kind of stuff, but he seems to be onto it. I suspect JFK was onto this as well. What do you suppose it was? I'll say it. Asked it about Trump and I asked it about JFK, that JFK saw this and was willing to go to war against it and was murdered because of that.
Yeah, and don't forget, they also knocked out Reagan. A lot of people don't know that really after Reagan was shot, he was never in control again. Cheney and Bush were. And please, everyone needs to understand, Prescott Bush was working with 3 Nazi bankers and got caught, and they shut down the bank to fund Hitler. Not to mention that, J.P. Morgan gave hundreds of millions of dollars to rebuild Nazi Germany after World War I. You know, that wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. And that was really funded by Wall Street. There's a great book by Anthony Sutton. I know he was called a conspiracy theorist, but there's plenty of evidence out there, particularly CIA documents that have been released over years. So what happened in 44 is they all got together, and that is what Milley and I believe Chuck Grassley are working on putting out in 2026 at some point. So what is going on right now is they are tracking these Nazi rat lines through Argentina into America. A lot of these companies, it was decided at this meeting in 44, they were going to get as much money out of Germany into America, start the corporations in America, many of them as front companies to launder that money to. Many of these companies became multinational corporations that are now part of the global public-private partnership that was created back in Switzerland during those war years when the world was focused on war and the international banking cartel were focused on a financial Fourth Reich. And I know it's hard for people to accept this, but if you really just break it down, what was the goal of the Third Reich? A unified Europe with basically no Russia. This even comes out in George Soros's document in 1993 called the NATO World Order, or Zig Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard, was a unified Europe that runs the world through Brussels and Geneva. We are right now watching the exact same thing play out in Europe right now. And again, we have to also understand that the history of the Cold War and Russia and the hatred of Russia that has been pushed on us through Hollywood and the media and everything else all these years leaves out a lot of history. And there's really no other way to say this other than that what we are dealing with now, and I'm talking about the expansion of NATO against the will of what was decided between Gorbachev and James Baker and Reagan, and then the intervention of NGOs all over the world, particularly George Soros's NGOs, and then the expansion one after another of surrounding Russia with NATO. And that NATO also had multiple people at the top of NATO that were full-on Nazis. Okay, so you have to understand, even what's going on in Ukraine was planned way back in the 90s. There was a plan for a third world war. And that third world war was, again, what did they try after the First World War? The League of Nations and a unified world currency. Failed because America was still wide awake and invested.
Actually, yes, this is, man, there's so much here. But the good news is we have we have time, as long as you can stick with us, Mel K. Folks, we'll be back. If you want to watch this on YouTube, go to my YouTube channel, Eric Metaxas YouTube channel, and we'll be back in hour 2 in just a moment. Welcome back. I'm talking to Mel K. We're talking about everything, Mel. We're talking about everything. This is a lot of stuff here, and I want to frame it for my audience because most in my audience are new to you and to these ideas. I want to ask again, what do you suppose it was about JFK and Donald Trump that was willing to go to war with these dark forces, these internationalists, these globalists that are themselves at war with the founders' vision of the United States of America, which I, as a Christian, believe is God's idea, the idea that a free people would exist in a sovereign nation to govern themselves. That, to me, it comes right out of the Bible. That's God's idea in history. It emerges for the first time in the history of the world in 1776. Ben Franklin, of course, says this is a republic. If you can keep it, this is not something that will just, be fine by itself. You have to be vigilant. And over the years, as you've been outlining, people lose focus. They forget that people have had to die so that we could be free and not controlled by others. And we get to a point, obviously, through the 20th century and now into the 21st, where we have drifted so far from this. We were on the verge in the last few years of losing it forever.
Yes.
And we're still in this war. But what do you suppose would animate somebody like a JFK to care about this, to say, I want to take this down?
Well, first, I think God, these are men that believe in God and believe in truth and believe in justice. They both also believed that autodetermination of the people was not only possible, but it was better than anything else. I also believe that both of these men were targeted by now this is a step back, because who is the war against? I have come to believe in what I'm working on. I'm working on a new book based on JFK's speech. I'm tentatively calling it Infiltration instead of Invasion. I think both of these men, and I also believe that other people, including late in the game, Eisenhower, Reagan at some point, a lot of people realized that I firmly believe that the Dulles brothers created the CIA to protect the banks, not the United States of America, and to ensure that the banks controlled everything. And the relationship between the Dulles brothers and the Rockefeller brothers, really, if you trace it back to Germany, and McKittrick, who was a banker as well and a lawyer from New York, that was running the Switzerland Bank of International Settlements during World War II, you will see that the apparatus and the CIA was built in tandem with Wall Street and the banking system. Now, if you also look around the world where all of our bases are, 800 bases, you will find that the protection in those areas happens to be near the central banks of those nations that are controlled by the Bank of International Settlements, which is a completely opaque, immune entity that controls the banking system of the world as of right now. I believe that entity that was created, I call it the International Banking Cartel, is not just the enemy of the United States. I believe that it is also the enemy of Russia and of China and of India and of Saudi Arabia and of a lot of these countries. And I believe that Donald Trump, in his first term, despite what they tried, and believe me, if we understand what I'm talking about and then look at why they had to get rid of Trump and he was not allowed to have detente with Putin or look into the truth about Ukraine, what was going on is that these same people, and you can call them the Chatham House and Council of Foreign Relations, which of course was a hub for the Dulles brothers and the Rockefellers for many, many years, and also which are the British and the U.S. contingency, I believe that we are one in the same with England, the United States, basically. That we are not separate from Europe. The Trilateral Commission, same thing, another Rockefeller project run by Brzezinski. You can look at Kissinger. All of these people we were told were heroes after World War II were really working on solidifying a one world top-down control grid using the banking system that then funded what? The tech companies through In-Q-Tel and other things, which is a CIA hedge fund, and DARPA, and all of these. Now, we also have a situation which is dangerous where we are aligned in every way at this point. And I agree with you. First of all, both Bushes, Prescott Bush first, but both Bushes, Clinton and Obama, and the autopen president are all aware of the entire game. Obama signed us on to Agenda 2030 in 2015 without telling or even mentioning, as they pushed all this globalism, that the Agenda 2030 is a nation state ending plan. It is a plan that says global problems can only be solved by global governance, which the mechanism to global governance is technocracy. And the technology that was funded post World War II was all about global surveillance. So when we're looking at, in today, and I just want to jump back because I want your audience to look up what Grassley is doing with Malay in Switzerland right now, because UBS, that is running the investigation into Credit Suisse, put out a press release recently. This is all going on since Trump got back in office in the behind the scenes, that once the report comes out from Grassley's office, that our understanding of World War II and post-World War II global financial system will blow people's minds. This is what I believe that is about. And I believe Donald Trump is fully aware that this is going to be exposed. And yet nobody's covering it. And at the end of the day, what we're going to see is that the United States was set up to be a strictly consumer society. It was a long game through the Bushes and the Clintons. And never forget that Obama's whole history goes back to CIA, USAID, all of that. That is not a lie. That is proven and easily seen. And I think what we have to deal with here is that Donald Trump, Reagan, and JFK all realized that the CIA itself was not a agency of the United States of America, that it was actually an agency created by international bankers and international lawyers to protect themselves.
It was my friend Roger Stone who turned me on to the idea that Reagan they tried to take him out. I mean, I'd never heard that before. Roger was on the program and he said something when they tried to. I said, "What, Roger? What they? We're talking about Reagan. We're not talking about JFK or Trump. What do you mean they?" And he starts going into this. He's also made the case about Nixon, that they, tried to take down, or they did take down Nixon. And again, when it takes a while for people to wake up to this, that's why I'm saying it's like drinking from a fire hose talking to you, because you're like, wait a minute, I get some of this, or I'm tracking with some of this, but this is heavy. And also I think there is a temptation for people to get cynical. They hear all this stuff and they get cynical. And I think we ought never to be cynical, folks. There is a God, there is right and wrong, and we are in a war with evil, and it is worth fighting in that war. And I would be the first to say it's God's war. We cannot fight it on our own. If you try to fight it in your own strength, which I believe John F. Kennedy and R.F. Kennedy did, in your own strength, you will be destroyed. If you do not put your life in God's hands and say, I want to be a tool in the hands of God here, because I can't do this on my own strength, you'll be taken out. And there's a history of people being taken out. You want to go up against these dark forces because they're demonic entities. This is not just bad people. This is really dark stuff. But I really do believe God is the answer. And we have to be clear, folks. And as you look in history, there's a beautiful side to this. The idea that a people could be free and govern themselves. These are beautiful ideas in history, rare ideas in history, and it is worth fighting for. And we are in that fight right now. And this president, of course, is doing amazing things. So when we come back, we'll keep going. We're talking to Mel K. You can find her at themelkshow.com. Welcome back, talking to Mel K. We're talking about a lot. So do you see right now with what President Trump is doing, and he seems to be onto this, and because of the way they've attacked him, he's awake. to what he's dealing
Oh,
with.
yeah.
And so he has put people in place from Kash Patel, Bongino, and down the line, who they're onto this. What is your sense of where we are? Because literally yesterday, I was with President Trump, and I, shook Pam Bondi's hand, and I didn't say to her, hey, when are we going to get some arrests? Because I'm sure she's hearing that a lot. But what is your sense of that, about what is going on, where we are in this war?
Well, I think that first of all, what you said before the break is really important. I actually see this as the best time for the United States of America to expose all of this, to empower ourselves with this information, and to realize that everything from the never-ending attempts at race wars to the weather underground tactics to the infiltration of our universities, all of this is being so openly shined a light on that you have to willfully not want to see it or be so distracted by the obvious color revolution tactics we've been living through. I do believe also that Donald Trump firmly wants a better way forward. He is very aware of what people call neocons, but really you have to go back and look at the entire thing, which is war for profit and who benefits from these wars for profit, particularly in the reconstruction phases. I also believe that Russiagate, people have to understand not just the Hillary Clinton aspect of it, but the Obama picking up the ball from Hillary Clinton and using it to make sure that Donald Trump could not be actually president and perform the things that he was elected to do at all, particularly when it came to Russia. Now, what you have to understand about that, too, if you're trying to put together the pieces, is that World War III, which we are on the cusp of, if we do not, in my opinion, we should not only pull out of NATO, which has been a fraud on the American people and should never have expanded, but if we do not just really cut the ties and say we are not part of Europe. Okay, we are not part of Europe. Europe has not acted since World War II as allies of the United States.
Okay, but that's the point. Again, forgive me, but like here's the point, folks. I would love to be part of Europe if it was the Europe of Charles de Gaulle and Winston Churchill, but it's not. It has drifted, and Vice President Vance gave that speech in Munich months ago, where you realize over the decades, whatever Europe has become, with the not believe in free speech, they are the enemies of all the stuff that we, the people in America, believe in. And so when we're talking about America or we're talking about Europe, we have to say which America, right? So when we talk about the America, the Biden regime, the LGBTQ ideologies being forced on the world, that's not the America that I believe in. And I think that there are people in England and there are people around Europe who and they want for the ADF in Germany, and they believe in a lot of these things we're talking about, but the people in control there clearly don't want that. And so I agree, when we talk about NATO, I think, hey, ladies and gentlemen, it's not 1956.
No.
We're living in a world where what is the point of NATO? What are the values of NATO? So I have said myself, it seems to me that once the Soviet Union fell, NATO suddenly becomes absurd. Why do we have NATO? And you just mentioned, Trump in his first term wanted détente, to use an old Cold War phrase, with Putin. Détente doesn't mean we agree on everything. It doesn't mean we have the same values as Putin. But détente is can be a wise thing, where you say, listen, we're not going to make Ukraine part of NATO and keep pushing you, and I guess it takes wisdom in this kind of stuff. So we are talking about a lot of stuff, but this idea of NATO and us as being on the same page, again, if Obama is president, of course, Obama's on the same page as the people in the EU, whoever they are. But most Americans are not. Donald Trump is not. Do you have any sense that there are forces within Europe that are pushing against this? I mean, the idea of
certainly.
So say that a little bit, because I can be slightly hopeful about Europe.
Yeah. Well, what I want to stress is that we paid for the EU. The United States taxpayers paid for the EU and the euro to exist. The EU is not about a unified Europe. The EU is the international banking cartel that controls 27 countries in Europe, and that they also control NATO. And NATO is not a defensive force because this goal is still the opposite of what we've been told. It is the same goal as it's always been, which is destroying Russia. As per Zig Brzezinski was not only the architect of the unified Europe without Russia and a Polish person who had deep hatred for Russia, he was not only the Secretary of State to Carter, Obama brought him back in. Okay. And his whole plan, there are two documents out there that people can look at. One from 93, George Soros wrote it. It's on Open Society. It's called the NATO World Order. He went around, he has that university in the EU. It's basically a color revolution university whose library is actually was sponsored by Anthony Blinken, another trilateral, another guy who subverted Trump during the first term in foreign policy. But you have to understand that these people have a long-term goal of a unified Europe with no Russia. Okay. And once you understand that they wrote books about it, because it's the Soros document from 93, but Brzezinski from 95. Well, both of them had a lot of influence over who? Bill Clinton. Who expanded NATO? Bill Clinton expanded NATO. He was an acolyte of both, a lot of the CFR people, Council of Foreign Relations, but also he was an acolyte of George Soros for decades. And then when you look at the Marshall Plan, how did the EU create itself? Well, with the help of Henry Kissinger and Zig Brzezinski and a lot of people at Harvard that helped create and push not just the EU, but also the end of the gold standard. And then at that same time in 1971, the birth of the World Economic Forum. And all of these groups are all together, and many of them are protected under a very insidious act that needs to be addressed, I hope, by Donald Trump, the International Organization Immunity Act that was put in place in 45 and is protecting this governments above governments. So the illusion that we are free continues because they work together in tandem in regional meetings. So when you hear about Bilderberg or you hear about, Davos or whatever, the truth of those groups, the Trilateral, Council of Foreign Relations, is that they still look at the West as theirs, as a hub of one. And all of our nations, including Hungary, is pushing back, France is pushing back, Germany is pushing back, and they used Germany in World War I and World War II, because another thing that gets me in trouble is I often say, Germany might have lost World War II, but the Nazis did not. And I believe Chuck Grassley and Mel are going to prove that. And once we start seeing what really happened with the infiltration of the United States of America and then all the stuff under the guise of chasing communism, and then McCarthy and everyone are destroyed as crazy people and conspiracy theorists, and we have Dulles, who I believe fully was behind everything with JFK and RFK, is then the investigator. You're going to see the same pattern after the murder of JFK with the Warren Commission has repeated over and over and over. The people that were complicit in creating the trauma-inducing event, or some people call it false flag or Operation Gladio or whatever you want to call it, these events are used to create suggestibility and to give the government more power. The Patriot Act was not written because of 9/11. The Patriot Act was actually in a bill under Clinton, and it did not go through. Okay. And then they had to find another way. The goal after World War II with the international banking cartel, the Dulles brothers and the Rockefeller brothers, odd alliance with Wall Street and international law firms, was to create an apparatus that could control the world without being seen. And that is where we are. So we have to look at things like BlackRock. How is BlackRock $11 trillion, the biggest fund that controls most public pensions, on the same day Donald Trump meets with Putin in Alaska? Larry Fink of BlackRock is elevated to this top position at the World Economic Forum. And when you start working backwards and see that all of these groups were put in place for something, and that they started arming Ukraine at the fall of the USSR, and that the CIA was deeply embedded before they even overthrew under Obama the duly elected Ukrainian government, Ukraine has been hollowed out for decades to become the hub to kick off World War III.
We'll be right back talking to Mel K. You have time for one more segment?
Sure.
Okay, here we go. Welcome back. Mel K, I said it before, it's like drinking from a fire hose. There's a lot of stuff here, and we tend not to talk about this kind of thing too much on this show, so it's a big learning curve, but it's very important. You mentioned one of the things, I mean, you mentioned so much, but the gold standard. Do you suppose, I mean, I don't know if it was Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent or Trump who kind of floated the idea that maybe we'll come back to the gold standard. I thought anything is possible with this president. This is why it's so delightful, because he thinks up crazy stuff like, hey, you know what? Let's go back to calling it the Department of War. He does that kind of stuff, and it's breathtaking, because most people, I think, we've been trained to think, well, that could never happen. You know, that ship has sailed. He's like, no. If that's a bad idea, we'll get rid of it. If that's a good idea, we'll go back to it. What do you suppose, you know, when we're talking about tariffs, we're talking about What do you see possible economically? Do you think this president can pull that off? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, what I think, first of all, we have to understand is that Trump's not saying anything by accident, and much of the things he's saying go back to history. And he's asking the American people, when people start freaking out about the Department of War, well, it used to be called the Department of War, and go look at why. You know what I mean? And there's other things like that when he talks about that. Now, the thing with gold that we have to understand, first of all, I believe firmly that Donald Trump will be working with the BRICS nations. No matter what he says, I do believe that there's more going on than we think. Not only that, but I also believe that he will be meeting with both Putin and Xi, possibly together in the next few months. That's first of all. The world is hoarding gold for a reason. China the most, but all of the world. The Otto Penn presidency, which I call the Council of Foreign Relations Trilateral Commission banking presidency, was doing everything they could. A big part of Russiagate was so that Donald Trump could not stop the march to World War III. He could not stop what they were building in Ukraine to kick off everything, because they are failing. The international banking system, the fiat currency, it's all failing. So what do they need? The Great Reset. Why do they need the Great Reset and a CBDC? To hide all the criminality that they've done since World War II. If they can do that and have a war right now, or bonds on TV today saying they're trying to put us all, everyone in the EU, into debt slavery for the next 100 years with this war. So first we have to understand, when we went off the gold standard, the agreement was to leave gold perpetually valued at what it was in 1971, $44. Yesterday, gold hit $3,600 an ounce. So the idea, and Goldman Sachs just put out a paper about this. They've been anti-gold for years. Suddenly they're telling people to buy gold. The Federal Reserve puts out something last week. People can look this up, saying that there's a good idea to help eliminate our debt by revaluing gold. We have 250, I think, million or tons. We have a ton of gold, apparently. It needs to be audited and weighed and all that. So here's the thinking, I think, behind that. We would need to revalue our gold holdings to today's prices to match the BRICS nations. The BRICS nations are dealing in $3,600 an ounce gold. Well, the stagnant and staid 1971 price of U.S. gold has not revaluated yet at all. So if you revalue it and do the math, that's pretty much our debt. So there is an idea of that. Now, there's a lot of chaos with the Bitcoin and the stable coins and all of that. That might come and go, but gold and silver is not. And the rest of the world is turning to it because the international banking cartel that really has run the wars and the military-industrial complex, they do not want that to happen, because it is how they keep going. So I think that there is a race to try to kick off this war, have an Article 5 NATO, which Ukraine's not even in NATO, but have an Article 5, continue down the path of war so that that cannot happen. Okay? Because if gold is revalued and we start dealing on the world stage in gold and silver as intended in the beginning, the only money mentioned in the Constitution or in the Federalist Papers or anything else was gold and silver. So if we actually go back to everything pre 1913, I'd say to everyone out there, just read George Washington's farewell letter, and you'll know where we went wrong on every step of the way. But revaluing our gold to match the rest of the world currently would change our dynamics financially in unbelievable ways. And the other thing about tariffs that I want people to understand, the tariffs are to even out the playing field of what we have been deceived and looted and lied to about since World War II, 1944 at least, which is that the United States of America taxpayer has paid for this entire globalist gamble, this entire fiat currency gamble, this entire endless war on a tactic known as terror. And I would say that the biggest player in this entire game is not only the CIA. I frankly believe from my research into Dulles in Switzerland and what was going on and the working with the Nazis and everything, the Reich Bank especially, which basically was swallowed into the BIS, is that this was a long game. And the long game was to, as soon as their financial model was to break, and I think it was gamed out to be now or 2020, that they had to do something. So, we had the pandemic, and we had the stolen election, and we have color revolutions all over the world, unmitigated migration into all basically white Christian nations only. And now a kickoff by any means necessary to a third world war. And the people have to understand we are all on the same side if we believe in God and freedom and justice and truth. And this is where I think skepticism is not the way to go. Actually reinvesting in your country, because we are still the founders of this nation and we have to start acting like it.
Great place to leave it. Just so fascinating. Mel K, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll see you again.